Alright, so today's video is yet again aimed at Bethesda and Fallout 76, but this time I want to take a different approach. I recently released a video aimed at spurring debate between myself and another gaming creator. In that video, I decided to go down the route of detail-oriented analysis, and frankly, people loved it. The creator I aimed at squaring off against has refused to respond short of a meek little paragraph in the comment section, and I realized this was a mistake of my own construction. I failed to include debate points beyond initially and totally disproving his current position. The video was my opening salvo, if you will, and I had much more planned. What I failed to create, though, was an opportunity for meaningful responses, despite that being my actual goal. If given a retroactive option to change that, I would have ended with a series of debate point questions and an open forum call to action. Regardless, it was received well by my audience, and the analytical deconstruction of material, turns out, is very, very fun for me. So I figured, why not apply that same type of process to the current Fallout 76 false advertising fiasco. I've been sitting here in the dark, snacking on goldfish hunched over my computer keyboard, researching Yale law journals, FTC regulations, legal terms, guidelines, manufacturing prices, past cases, and here are the important results. To very quickly summarize the general situation, Bethesda advertised a canvas bag to their customers as a portion of the $200 Power Armor Special Edition of Fallout 76. They gave out well-crafted, high-quality material backpacks to journalists and influencers at multiple key press events, but when launch day itself rolled around, shipped a nylon replacement bag to all legitimate customers who had themselves actually purchased the Power Armor Edition with their money, and this bag was of terrible comparative quality to that which was advertised. They at no point made any mention of the Switch until public backlash skyrocketed. The goal of this video is twofold. The first is to outline that Bethesda has participated in blatant and intentional false advertising. Whether or not an official legal case is brought to bear, grounds for it most certainly exist, and in a hierarchy of which issues are big or small, and what battles to choose or not choose, we should all be choosing this battle and draw a line so as to be clear that this type of practice should not be replicated across the industry ever again. The second part is shining a spotlight on what I believe to be a key event, and there is a small amount of speculation here, but not very much. The event is Bethesda has performed legal jujitsu in a sense, and disarmed a large swath of their disgruntled customers with a deeply disguised and negatively received public relations maneuver. First, to prove that there has indeed been false advertising, we must legally understand what is prosecutable and what is not with regards to the advertisement of physical merchandise. The following is from the official FTC Federal Trade Commission website in regards to false advertising. What truth in advertising rules apply to advertisers? Advertising must be truthful and non-deceptive, advertisers must have evidence to back up their claims, and advertisements cannot be unfair. If we scroll down, we can find what makes an advertisement deceptive. Is likely to mislead customers, acting reasonably under the circumstances, and is material, that is important to a consumer's decision to buy or use the product. Furthermore, what makes an advertisement unfair? It causes or is likely to cause substantial consumer injury, which a consumer could not reasonably avoid, and it is not outweighed by the benefit to consumers. Now we need to jump over to a legal dictionary repository in order to explore the term injury, because this actually proves to be very important in context. Under false advertising, they define 5 key things a plaintiff must prove in order to build a credible case. Proof of requirement. To establish that an advertisement is false, a plaintiff must prove 5 things. 1. A false statement of fact has been made about the advertiser's own or another person's goods, services, or commercial activity. This is proven easily by the marketing and product image used by Bethesda claiming a canvas West Tech bag, as well as their product description up until very recently, which has now been switched to include a small disclaimer that the bag does not actually match the shippable product. But on other e-commerce platforms, the product description still reflects their initial false claim that it would be a canvas bag instead of a thin nylon material. Number 2, the statement either deceives or has the potential to deceive a substantial portion of its targeted audience. This is very straightforward. Anyone who purchased the Power Armor Edition at all was deceived. 3, the deception is also likely to affect the purchasing decisions of its audience. This one is interesting because a case can be made that the canvas bag is the only item shippable with a literal practical value, thus bumping up its consideration weight for many customers. The rest of the items do not offer a utility function, which could have far-reaching usage purposes and lasting benefits. The argument that the canvas bag holds additional stock in a customer's buying decision, therefore, is a plausible angle, but regardless of that, it certainly has enough effect to easily meet the third requirement for a standard legal case. Number 4, the advertising involves goods or services in interstate commerce. Yup, obvious, that's a checkmark. Number 5, the deception has either resulted in or is likely to result in injury to the plaintiff. Here we yet again see the term injury, and if we read on, the most heavily weighed factor is the advertisement's potential to injure the customer, yet again injury. The injury is usually attributed to money the consumer lost through a purchase that would not have been made had the advertisement not been misleading. False statements can be defined in two ways, those that are false on their face and those that are implicitly false. So it's now clear that Bethesda's advertising should be considered unfair and deceptive by a simple surface level examination of the terminology and public information. But the question is, will it be? The FTC has some very clearly outlined guidelines for their own determination of whether or not ads are deceptive. A typical inquiry follows these steps. The FTC looks at the ad from the point of view of the reasonable consumer, the typical person looking at the ad. Rather than focusing on certain words, the FTC looks at the ad in context, words, phrases, and pictures to determine what it conveys to consumers. That is very bad news for Bethesda. They have falsely advertised language, wording, and visuals to accompany the product. Viewing the advertisement in context is when it is most deceiving. We don't need to parcel anything out to make it seem that way. Reading further, the FTC looks at both express and implied claims. An express claim is literally made in the ad. For example, ABC mouthwash prevents colds is an express claim that the product will prevent colds. An implied claim is one made indirectly or by inference. ABC mouthwash kills the germs that cause colds contains an implied claim that the product will prevent colds, although the ad doesn't literally say that the product prevents colds. It could be reasonable for a consumer to conclude from the statement kills the germs that cause colds that the product then will prevent colds. Under the law, advertisers must have proof to back up express and implied claims that consumers take from an ad. This is all quite clearly an express case, as again, it is literally stated in many areas that the product will be of a certain manufacturing material, which was then proven to be untrue. To continue, the FTC looks at what the ad does not say. That is, if the failure to include information leaves consumers with a misimpression about the product. For example, if a company advertised a collection of books, the ad would be deceptive if it did not disclose that consumers actually would receive abridged versions of the books. This is relevant because an abridged version of a book is a shorter, debatably lower quality version of the book that is cheaper to manufacture by a reduction in material costs in other areas. A cheaper bag, manufactured with worse materials, is very similar to an abridged book, by this example, in its potential to cause consumer injury. Injury being the loss of funds that otherwise would not have been spent. Moving on, the FTC looks at whether the claim would be material, that is, important to a consumer's decision to buy or use the product. Examples of material claims are representations about a product's performance, features, safety, price, or effectiveness. This yet again is perfectly applicable because a canvas bag is heavier, stronger material, and it can be sewn when ripped, whereas nylon must be patched. We can also recall that the bag has practical applications, which the rest of the shipped items do not, leaving the door open to make the case it is even more important because of that fact. And for safety and effectiveness, there are quality differences in synthetic polymers versus actual fabric, though it is a bit of a stretch if the advertising is regarded at face value and a consumer uses the bag as if it were in fact made of canvas material. It could quite literally have safety implications when carrying heavy objects or performing different tasks. Finally, the FTC looks at whether the advertiser has sufficient evidence to support the claims in the ad. The law requires that advertisers have proof before the ad runs. This is a very abstract concept when applied to a physical product like a bag, since it's mostly enforced and used in industries such as pharmaceuticals, for example. But with regards to advertising a product and then shipping a different one, it will still hold up. By the FTC standards, it is clear that Bethesda is guilty of false advertising. Now, hopping back over to the legal repository, we can take a look at another critically defined set of requirements for false advertising cases. Types of false advertising. Today's regulations define three main acts that constitute false advertising: failure to disclose, flawed and insignificant research, and product disparagement. The majority of these regulations are outlined in the Lanham Act of 1946. I read the Lanham Act. It is a lot to take in, and this site does a much better job of breaking it down. However, It's all there. Failure to disclose. It is considered false advertising under the Lanham Act if a representation is untrue as a result of the failure to disclose a material fact. Therefore, false advertising can come from both misstatements and partially correct statements that are misleading because they do not disclose something the consumer should know. The Trademark Law Revision Act of 1988, which added several amendments to the Lanham Act, left creation of the line between sufficient and insufficient disclosure to the discretion of the courts. Bethesda did not disclose at any point a material switch from canvas to nylon, and Bethesda has openly stated publicly the switch was for a manufacturing cost reason. Therefore, failure to disclose information to the customer that they should know. By any and every definition I have been able to find and dissect, Bethesda has unequivocally committed the crime of false advertising. A final area that is often used as armor when legal cases are brought to bear is proof of intent. Though significantly more abstract in some cases, with this situation, we can extrapolate that Bethesda obviously knew the moment they made the concrete decision to switch from canvas to nylon that they had the intent to deceive, by then intentionally neglecting any sort of disclosure of that fact. The relative costs of nylon and canvas manufacturing can be easily compared, but this does not even become necessary because Bethesda has admitted themselves that the switch was made for pricing reasons. This equates to a lower quality product, which was then not publicly disclosed, because had Bethesda openly come out with a legal adherence statement that they were fundamentally changing one of the products in the Power Armor Edition, arguably one of, if not the most useful and important product for many consumers, their sales would have suffered. This draws a line directly onto intent to deceive by omission. With all of this being true, many people are wondering why they have not been charged, and the explanation is quite simple. They are rich. They are a massive corporation. They have a veritable army of lawyers, much smarter than I or many other interested parties, and they will exploit every loophole possible in order to stall out any case that is brought against them, or shut down any potential case that is attempting to form. To use some gaming terminology here, they are probably exploiting glitches in our legal system, or at least will if they are confronted by the necessity to do so. This finally brings us to our second topic, and that is their genius legal jujitsu. There is some speculation contained in this part, but it all fits very well within my research and lends itself to the assumption that this is in fact correct. Bethesda offered 500 atoms to aggrieved parties, atoms being their intrinsic platform currency for microtransactions, and it's a bit of a joke honestly because 500 atoms isn't even enough to buy a third of certain power armor skins in their store, but the method by which users went about receiving this, quote, compensation, unquote, if you can even call it that, is what's very important. Customers were directed to a form in which they entered some information and received their atoms, but that form and pages directing to it were carefully crafted. The line, "We hope you will accept our apology," can be seen, and a clear payment is taking place by which accepting the customer is then agreeing to. An easy defense can be constructed that all customers who accepted 500 free atoms did in fact accept damages for any and all grievances relating to their Power Armor Edition purchase, and thus lose the ability to participate in a class action lawsuit. Additionally, their ability to bring forward any other legal case is destroyed. The more consumers they can bring through this system, the less hostile parties are still armed with defensible cases. They bring through enough of the player base, the real threat of a credible class action lawsuit, one with teeth that could actually hurt them, is neutralized. If a few slip through the cracks and they even end up having to pay damages or issue refunds, it will be few and far between. In essence, it's genius and it's effective. To summarize, Bethesda has clearly committed fairly egregious false advertising, clearly in violation of any and all legally defined requirements. Whether or not they will suffer any officially enforced consequences because of those actions remains to be seen, but it is unlikely to have any lasting, strictly legal ramifications. It's up to us as a player base to remember this and to create a market reaction accordingly that penalizes their behavior as to set an industry standard, precedent, and example. That's going to wrap it up. Lately, I've been reflecting on what type of content I want to produce, and defending the interests of viewers and consumers at large seems to be sort of where I'm starting to land. As always, thank you for watching. Check out the links down below if you want to support or get involved with Upper Echelon in other ways, and I am very interested to hear the feedback on this particular video. As always, though, have a nice night, and thank you for watching.